Most people don't remember the sacrifices their mothers made, but I remember every single one I made for my son, right down to the cold dinners and missed paychecks. I was 28 when I gave up my nursing scholarship to stay home with Gregory because his asthma flared in the winter and no one else could soothe him. I remember standing outside our trailer in Bentonville, Arkansas, holding him in a blanket while the power was out, humming lullabies as ice formed on the windows. I remember skipping doctor appointments for myself so he could get new glasses. I remember working double shifts in the ER and then coming home to cook him his favorite stew, just so he felt normal. I remember everything, not because I want credit, but because he's forgotten it all. And the worst part? He didn't just forget. He rewrote the whole story. The morning sun hit the curtains in that slow, syrupy way it always did in mid-April. It was my 74th birthday. But I didn't expect cake or candles or even a card. I'd already set out the store-bought sheet cake on the counter. White frosting. Blue cursive. Happy birthday, Mom. I wrote it in myself with the icing pen. I didn't want the bakery girl looking at me with those pity eyes again. I lived alone in a small but tidy house that used to belong to my mother. It sat right on the edge of Bentonville, where the sidewalks end and the gravel takes over. It wasn't much, but it was paid off, and it kept the rain off my bones. My knees had started to hum more than usual this year, a quiet warning I was trying to ignore. I had everything set up for Gregory's visit. He said he'd come by early afternoon. That usually meant 3. ROP, map. At the earliest, I spent the morning dusting the picture frames in the hallway. One of them was from Gregory's high school graduation. Me, in scrubs, smiling too wide. I'd worked a night shift and hadn't slept, but I didn't care. He was valedictorian, standing tall in that blue gown. Another photo, more recent, was from his clinic's grand opening in Dallas. A sleek, modern place with white walls and chrome chairs. I'd helped him launch that dream, cashed in the last of my husband's life insurance, and sold the lake lot we were saving for retirement. It's just a small loan. Mom, he'd said, I'll pay you back. He never did. I never asked. That's not what mothers do. But lately, I'd started wondering if being quiet all these years had done more harm than good. I sat down at the kitchen table, sipping black coffee from my favorite mug, chipped on the rim, but still holding strong. Just like me, I thought about calling Gregory to remind him, but then I didn't. I didn't want to seem needy. Mothers of accomplished sons aren't supposed to be lonely. Right. At 2:58 p.m. A silver Lexus pulled into the driveway. I peeked through the curtains. Gregory stepped out, crisp slacks, a sky blue shirt that brought out the gray in his temples. He looked tired, successful, like someone who belonged in a lifestyle magazine. He didn't bring flowers. He didn't bring a gift, just his phone in one hand and his keys in the other. Hey, Mom, he said as he walked in, brushing my cheek with a quick kiss. Happy birthday. Thank you, honey. I'm glad you came. Yeah. Of course, he said, already scrolling through something on his screen. Busy day. I've got like 20 emails to answer. Mind if we keep it short? I smiled. Of course. I made cake. He glanced at it. Looks festive. I cut 2 slices and handed him one on a plate. He took it but didn't touch it. So, listen, I wanted to talk to you about something, he said. There it was. The tone, that certain tightness in his voice that always meant he needed something. You know the second location I've been working on? The one in Plano. It's almost ready. We just need one last push. Capital. And I was thinking, maybe you'd want to invest. I stared at him. Gregory, I've already given so much. I know. And I'm grateful. Really. But you're not doing anything with your money. Mom, it's just sitting there. And you're getting older. He said it so plainly, like reading a line from a brochure. You're 74, he added. It's not like you're gonna go bungee jumping. I set my fork down slowly. Gregory, I said quietly, do you really think I'm just done? He gave a short laugh, like he didn't want to sound cruel but couldn't help himself. I'm just saying, wouldn't it make more sense to use your money now? while it can actually help someone, that was the moment it happened. Not the words themselves, but the weight underneath them, the shift. My son, my only child, didn't just see me as old. He saw me as unnecessary. A relic. A resource. I nodded slowly and looked down at my slice of cake. It was tilting to one side, the frosting starting to melt a little in the warm afternoon light. He didn't notice. He was already texting someone. At that moment, I realized something important. If this were a movie, the audience would be rooting for me. They'd be waiting for the part where I stand up, take back my power, and remind everyone who I really am. Maybe this wasn't just my life anymore. Maybe it was the beginning of a revenge story, only not the loud kind, the quiet kind. The kind where dignity doesn't scream, it just walks away. And sometimes, walking away is louder than any shout. The silence after Gregory's words stretched longer than either of us seemed to know what to do with. I kept my eyes on the cake. The happy birthday I had written myself was now smudged, as if even the frosting knew the day had turned sour. I just think it's time to be realistic, Gregory said, his voice lighter now, trying to smooth over the insult like a wrinkle in a tie. You've lived a good life. Mom, you worked hard. You raised me. But now, maybe it's time to let go of some things. You don't need to hold on so tight. I looked up at him, really looked. His face was handsome, polished, like the lobby of a building he no longer wanted me walking into. I remembered the nights I'd stayed up with him through fevers, the time I sold my car to pay his college deposit, the Christmas he cried because I couldn't afford both presents and a heater, and how I wrapped him in 3 blankets and told him we were pretending to be polar explorers. And here he was, telling me I had no use anymore. Let go of what? I asked softly. The idea that you still need to plan for the future. You're not exactly... He stopped himself. But the damage was done. I'm not what? I asked. He looked uncomfortable, young. I forced a smile. No, I suppose I'm not. He exhaled like he was relieved I'd taken it so well. Exactly. So maybe think about enjoying things in a simpler way. Downsizing. Less responsibility. I mean, that house, it's old. It's drafty. Don't you get cold at night? Only when I eat alone. I wanted to say, only when birthdays are celebrated with silence and self-written frosting. But instead, I stood up and walked to the sink, placing my untouched cake into the trash. I heard him shift behind me, maybe confused, maybe irritated. Mom, did you hear me? I nodded. I did. I'm just trying to help, he added. I turned around. I know you think you are. We didn't speak much after that. He glanced at his watch, said he had a conference call in 30 minutes, hugged me like I was the receptionist. Then he walked out, his keys jingling like punctuation at the end of a sentence. When the door closed, I stood in the middle of the kitchen for a long time. The walls were quiet, not peaceful, just quiet, like a church that had lost its choir. I picked up the second slice of cake and walked it out to the porch. I sat on the swing. The old one Gregory used to love as a boy. He used to climb up into my lap with a book in one hand and a sandwich in the other, asking me to read the same story over and over. Now he could barely sit with me for 10 minutes without checking his phone. I took one bite of the cake, then set it down beside me. It was too sweet. I pulled my shawl tighter. The breeze had turned. I could feel it, like the shift of a season not marked on calendars. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. The fan above me turned slow, steady, like time mocking me for thinking I could ever matter as much as I used to. Have you ever looked at someone you loved more than your own breath and realized they don't see you anymore? Because if you have, if you've sat quietly while someone peeled you away from the center of their world and moved you to the edge, you know exactly how I felt that night. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was still too stunned for that. But something inside me had changed. There was a stillness in me that felt different this time. Not grief, not sadness, something else, resolve. The next morning, I woke early. The house was cold, but I didn't turn on the heat. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at the photo of Gregory's clinic on the wall. Sleek, modern, funded by the very life I had postponed. I picked up my notebook and pen. It had been a long time since I'd written anything for myself. Not lists, not appointments, not reminders. Just thoughts. I wrote down everything I remembered about raising him. The sacrifices, the quiet joys, the little hurts that stacked up over time like unpaid bills. Then I wrote, he doesn't owe me anything, but he doesn't get to erase me either. There's a difference between needing to be thanked and needing not to be forgotten. Around noon, I got a text from him. Don't forget to check that investment account this week. We should make a decision soon. Not a word about my birthday. Not an apology, not even a thank you for the cake. I deleted the message without responding. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in over a decade. I poured myself a glass of wine. Cheap, red, but bold. And I opened my laptop. I logged into the investment account. The one I'd started 15 years ago with just a few $100. The numbers had changed since then. $620,000. I stared at the number for a long time, not because of its size, but because of its silence. This number represented every skipped vacation, every second job, every I'll eat later. And Gregory thought I had no future to plan for. That's when I knew this wasn't the end of my story. Maybe it was just the end of the version he was trying to write for me. I was going to write my own version now. It's strange how silence can become louder than noise when you're alone. Not the peaceful kind of silence, like the one you feel when you're reading on a rainy day, but the heavy kind, thick and cold, pressing on your chest like a memory you didn't ask to remember. After Gregory left, the house felt like a forgotten museum. Everything was still in place. My birthday cake, half covered with foil. My blue cardigan draped over the arm of the couch. My late husband's photo on the mantel. But somehow, it felt like I disappeared from it. Like the moment he walked out that door. He'd taken whatever was left of me with him. Not out of malice, but out of disregard. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel sad. I just faded. That's what being erased feels like. It doesn't hit like a punch. It dissolves you. The next few days passed in a fog. I cooked meals and didn't eat them. I folded laundry that had already been folded. I caught myself turning the porch light on at night like I used to when Gregory was in high school, coming home late from debate practice. But now, I left it on for no one. I saw the neighbors walking their dogs. I waved. They waved back, smiling. But no one came to the door. No one asked how I was doing. And honestly, what would I say if they did? Hi, I'm Ruth. I raised a child alone, gave him everything. And now I'm just a line item on his checklist, right between investment options and phone upgrades. One afternoon, I tried calling Gregory, not to argue, just to hear his voice. He didn't pick up. I left a voicemail, short and careful. Hey, honey, just checking in. Hope everything's going well at the clinic. Let me know if you need anything. He didn't call back. Instead, the next morning, I got a group text. Mom, just a reminder. Don't forget to review the financials. If we're going to make the expansion happen, we need clarity soon. Thanks. Clarity. That word stung more than I expected. Clarity. As in, are you in or are you out? Clarity. As in, are you going to give us what we want? Or should we stop pretending? It wasn't just a message about money. It was the subtle, brutal suggestion that my only value to him now was what I could contribute. I wanted to scream, not in rage, but in grief. A long, soundless wail that only mothers know, the kind you let out when the person you love the most stops seeing you as someone who matters. Instead, I sat down on the floor in front of the hallway closet. I opened the bottom drawer. Inside was a shoebox filled with photos. Gregory in a Halloween costume I'd stitched by hand. Gregory with a scraped knee, clinging to my arm like I was the only safe place in the world. Gregory, age 9, beaming next to a science fair project we'd stayed up till midnight building. I pressed my palm against one of the pictures and whispered, "Where did you go?" That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked the halls barefoot, the wood floors cool against my feet. I ended up in the kitchen, staring at the digital clock on the microwave. 3:17 a. Then 12. I opened the fridge, looked at the leftover cake. and closed it again. I didn't want to eat. I didn't want to move. I just wanted to stop feeling like a ghost in my own home. For a moment, I wondered what it would be like to just disappear, to pack a small bag and vanish. Let Gregory wake up one morning and realize his mother wasn't around to answer the phone, or bake his favorite peach cobbler, or transfer money at the drop of a hat. But even as I thought it, I knew the truth. He wouldn't notice, not right away. Maybe not for weeks. Maybe only when a bank transaction bounced or a call went unanswered long enough to inconvenience him. That realization hit harder than anything else. He wouldn't notice if I disappeared, because he already thought I had. That was the moment I stopped wondering whether he'd come back around, whether he'd apologize, whether this was just a phase. It wasn't. This wasn't a rough patch. It was the shape of our relationship now. Cold, conditional, transactional. And me, I was tired of pretending I didn't see it. The next day, I did something small, but it felt like climbing a mountain. I took down the framed photo of Gregory's clinic from the living room wall, not in anger, not in bitterness, but because I needed to reclaim the space. That wall had been mine before it was his, before he turned into a man who only called when he needed something. I replaced the photo with a painting I'd found at a thrift store years ago, a seascape, gentle and calm. Blue waves under a golden sky. I remember buying it for $5 because it reminded me of something I'd once dreamed about. Standing on a cliff, the wind in my hair. No one needing me, no one using me, just me, breathing. As I stepped back and looked at that painting on my wall, I felt something stir deep in my chest. Not happiness, not yet, but space. And maybe that was enough for now. The morning came with the kind of golden light that made everything outside look warmer than it was. The kind of morning I used to love. Quiet, simple, soft enough to make coffee feel like a luxury. But even that warmth couldn't touch the cold that had settled in my chest. I stood by the window in my bathrobe, staring out at the lawn that needed mowing and the mailbox that only held catalogs now. No handwritten letters, no birthday cards, nothing personal. I sipped my coffee and opened my laptop, not to check emails, not to browse news, to log into the investment account. The password was the same as it had been for years. Something simple. Something only I would know. Gregory, 79. I typed it in with a steady hand, not shaking, not anxious, just ready. The numbers loaded slowly, but I already knew what I'd see. I had checked it weeks ago. Still, something felt different today. $620, 3/11/89. I stared at it, blinking slowly. It was real. 15 years ago. After I retired from the hospital, I took $3,000 from my savings and put it into a few mutual funds. I didn't know much back then, only what the girl at the bank had explained. Let it sit and let it grow, she'd said. And so I did. I never told Gregory. He was too young at the time, and then later, too opinionated. He'd have laughed at me for trying to manage money without a financial advisor, but I was careful, conservative. I never took risks. I just let time do its thing. And now, there it was. Enough money to live comfortably for the rest of my life. Enough to travel. Enough to buy a home by the sea. Enough to matter. Not because money makes a person matter, but because I realized, in that moment, I had choices. And that changed everything. I clicked through the tabs, looked at the gains, the growth over the years. The careful way it had accumulated like a secret version of me had been quietly working all this time, while the visible version folded towels and baked casseroles. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something unfamiliar, something close to pride, not because I had money, but because I had done something entirely for myself. No one helped me. No one praised me. No one even knew. And suddenly, I didn't want to tell Gregory. I didn't want to hear that patronizing tone. Wow, Mom, good for you. I didn't want his approval. I didn't need it. That realization hit me hard. Not needing his approval. I think I'd been chasing it since he was 12 years old. I stood up and walked to the bathroom. Looked at myself in the mirror, gray hair pinned back with a clip, wrinkles that told the truth. eyes that still held stories I hadn't told anyone. "You're not useless," I whispered. The words came out quieter than I meant them to, but they felt powerful anyway. Like a thread had been pulled loose from a tight knot that had been binding me for decades. Later that afternoon, I made a list. Not a grocery list, not errands. Just one heading at the top, things I've always wanted to do but never did. Visit the ocean, paint, drink wine in Italy, read a book cover to cover without checking the time, learn to make my grandmother's pie crust, live in a place where no one knows me. Some of the things were small, some were big, but none of them included help Gregory open another clinic. He texted me later that evening, "Gregory, talked to the contractor today. He said we need confirmation about the funding by Friday." I didn't reply. 5 minutes later, "Gregory, Mom, did you get my message?" I turned my phone off and left it on the kitchen counter. I didn't feel guilt. I felt like someone who had finally stepped out of the background of her own life. I made dinner, something I hadn't done in a while, a roasted chicken with thyme and lemon. Just for me. I even lit a candle on the table. No reason? Just because it made me feel like I was having dinner with someone important, and I was having dinner with a woman who had held a family together by her fingertips for years, who had been everyone's emergency contact, everyone's late-night phone call, everyone's backup plan, and she was still standing. No parade, no applause, but she was still standing. After dinner, I sat out on the porch with a blanket around my shoulders and watched the sun sink behind the trees. There were birds somewhere in the distance, kids riding their bikes. Life went on, around me, beyond me. And for the first time, I didn't feel left behind. I felt quietly apart from it, like I was on the edge of something new. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe all the years I thought were behind me were actually still in front of me. Maybe this was the beginning, not the ending. The next morning, I woke before the sun, not because I couldn't sleep, but because I finally had something worth waking up for. I made coffee and drank it slow, letting the silence settle around me like a warm blanket instead of a cold reminder. By 8 I was dressed in clean jeans and a denim shirt that hadn't seen daylight in years. I pulled my hair back, tied on my sneakers, and slid my old checkbook into my purse. Not because I was planning to spend money right away, but because I knew today I would make decisions that didn't involve anyone else's approval. At the bank, the woman behind the desk smiled politely. "How can I help you today?" "Miss Elowin," I said. "Ruth Elowin. I'd like to transfer some funds and make changes to my account access." She raised an eyebrow but didn't ask questions. That was fine by me. I handed her my ID and waited while she pulled up my information. "I see you've had a joint access feature tied to Gregory Elowin," she said gently. "I'd like to remove that today," I replied. She hesitated for a split second. "Do you have a reason you'd like us to note?" I looked her square in the eyes and said, "Because the money's mine, and I no longer need to share it." It felt so good to say that out loud. We moved through the process efficiently. By the end of the hour, Gregory's access to my investments and savings was officially revoked. The only name on the accounts was mine. I walked out of that bank like I just shed 20 pounds I didn't know I was carrying. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about money. It was about reclaiming something I didn't realize I had given away. My autonomy. Back home, I made lunch. A real lunch, grilled cheese and tomato soup, just like I used to make for Gregory when he was sick. I sat at the table alone, but this time it didn't feel lonely. It felt intentional, like the start of something. I began tidying up drawers I hadn't opened in years. There were old receipts, expired coupons, greeting cards from people I hadn't heard from since 2009. I let go of most of it. But I kept one thing, a postcard I'd once picked up at a roadside diner. On the back, in faded ink, I'd scribbled, "Someday." It was a picture of a lighthouse. The waves around it were wild and crashing, but the tower stood steady, unmoved, unshaken. That was who I wanted to be now. That afternoon, I found the courage to open a folder labeled Legal. Inside were the documents Gregory had helped me draft years ago, power of attorney, emergency access forms, all with his signature in bold blue ink. I took a deep breath and made a call. "Hello? Yes, this is Ruth Elowin. I'd like to schedule an appointment to update my legal documents. Yes, I'll need to revoke previous access and name a new medical proxy. No, it won't be a family member. The woman on the other end was professional and kind. She didn't ask why. Maybe she already knew. Once the appointment was set, I sat at the kitchen table again and stared out the window. The magnolia tree in the backyard was blooming, soft white flowers opening like they'd never known winter. I reached for a notepad and wrote, "My life is not a footnote to someone else's success." It felt good to see it in ink. It felt even better to believe it. That weekend, I took a short drive to the nearby lake, the one Gregory had begged me to sell to help with his first clinic. I hadn't been back since. The new owner had turned the property into a small retreat for women recovering from burnout and grief. Funny, I thought, I could have used that myself. I parked the car and walked the path down to the dock. I stood at the edge, watching the water ripple under the breeze. A young woman sat nearby, sketching in a notebook. She smiled at me. I smiled back. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she said. "Always has been." I replied. We talked a while. Her name was Lila. She was an art teacher recovering from a divorce. Her parents had passed. No siblings, just her and the water, trying to make sense of everything. She asked me what brought me there. "I used to own this land," I said. Her eyes widened. "Really? Why'd you let it go?" I thought about that for a second. Because I thought helping someone else's dream was more important than keeping my own. She nodded slowly. "Do you regret it?" I looked back at the lake. Not anymore. And that was the truth. I didn't regret giving. I regretted believing that I had to give everything. That night, I opened my journal and wrote down one sentence: "I am more than what I gave away." I went to bed early, slept through the night, and woke to a peace I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't a victory parade. It wasn't an act of vengeance. It was just me, alive, aware, and finally, enough. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon. I almost didn't answer. The number wasn't saved in my phone, and lately, I'd stopped answering to things I hadn't invited, but something nudged me. So I picked it up. "Hi, Mom," Gregory said. His voice was tight, like a man trying not to sound worried. I said nothing for a moment. Just let the silence stretch. The kind of silence I'd grown comfortable with, the kind that makes other people squirm. "I've been trying to reach you," he continued. "Did you get my messages?" I did. A pause. "Okay. So, we've run into a little delay with the Plano expansion. The financing fell through. And, well, I know you said you needed time, but I was hoping we could revisit the idea of you investing. I think it could be a good way for you to be part of something meaningful. You know, meaningful. That word used to mean something when it came from him. Now, it just felt rehearsed. I'm already part of something meaningful," I said. Another pause, longer this time. "I don't follow. I'm working on something," I said. "Something that makes me feel proud." He didn't ask what. He just sighed, exasperated, like a man realizing a door he used to walk through freely was now closed. "Well," he said, his voice stiffening, "I guess I misunderstood your intentions." "No," I said quietly. "You just assumed I didn't have any." That was the end of that conversation. He hung up shortly after, and I set my phone down without a second thought. I wasn't angry. I didn't feel smug. I just felt still, like a boat that had drifted out of stormy water and into a quiet cove. A week later, I mailed out the first check, $50,000, made out to the Ruth Elowin Nursing Fund, housed under the community hospital where I once worked. The scholarship would be for students with no family support, because I knew what it was to build something from the bottom up with no one clapping in the wings. I didn't tell Gregory. I didn't announce it online. I didn't want recognition. But 3 weeks later, I received a letter in the mail. Handwritten. The kind of letter people don't send anymore. "Dear Ms. Elowin, I don't know who you are, but I want to thank you. I just learned I'm the first recipient of the scholarship you funded. I'm the first in my family to go to college. My mother passed when I was 14, and I've been on my own ever since. I work nights at the pharmacy to keep a roof over my head. This scholarship means I won't have to drop out next semester. I'm going to become a nurse. I'm going to help people like the ones who helped my mom in her final days. You have no idea what this means to me. With all my heart. Thank you. Tasha Green. I read it twice. Then a third time. Then I cried. Not the broken kind. The full kind. The kind of tears that come when something inside you finally says, you did the right thing. I framed the letter and put it on the wall where Gregory's clinic photo used to hang. One day, he might visit and see it there. Or maybe he won't. And either way, it won't matter. I had made peace with the version of motherhood that didn't come with a thank you. I had rewritten my own ending. Have you ever done something so deeply right and yet told no one about it? Because sometimes the most powerful moments of our lives aren't the ones we share, but the ones we treasure in silence. That summer, I drove to the coast. It wasn't a dramatic road trip. I didn't pack everything I owned. Just a suitcase, a good book, and a recipe card for my grandmother's pie crust, because it felt like time to finally learn. I rented a small cottage with peeling white shutters and a view of the sea. The owner asked if I was writing a book. No, I smiled, just living a new chapter. Every morning, I walked to the shore, barefoot in the sand, letting the water kiss my ankles like a quiet welcome. I'd sit under an umbrella with my journal, sketching plans for a small cooking class I wanted to host. Not for money, just for women like me, who'd spent a lifetime giving and wanted to remember how to create for themselves again. Sometimes, I'd sit for hours, watching couples walk the beach, mothers with toddlers, retired husbands with wives in floppy hats. I didn't envy them. I didn't feel bitter. I felt complete. One morning, I saw an older woman sitting alone near the pier. Her back was straight. Her hands rested calmly in her lap. We nodded to each other, and for a moment, I saw myself in her, a quiet strength, earned over years of being overlooked. I nodded again. She smiled. Nothing was said, but I felt seen, and that was enough. I started waking up earlier, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. The ocean air had worked its way into my bones, and every morning felt like the first breath after holding it in too long. I made a habit of walking barefoot down the beach at sunrise, letting the waves wash over my feet and carry away pieces of the woman I used to be, the one who waited by the phone, the one who thought she had to earn love by giving more than she had. There was a small cafe a few blocks from the cottage, run by a woman named Marion, who wore her silver hair in a braid and played vinyl records while she brewed coffee. She had a sign taped to the counter that read, "No talking politics before caffeine." We got along immediately. "Where are you from?" she asked one morning as she handed me a cup of dark roast with cinnamon. "Nowhere." "Really?" I said. "And everywhere." She grinned. "Good answer." That was the beginning of our rhythm. I'd stop by each day, help her carry the croissants in from her car, and sometimes wipe down tables when she got busy. She never paid me, and I never asked. It wasn't about money. It was about belonging to something that didn't ask me to prove my worth. One afternoon, she asked if I wanted to help host her Thursday night book club. Just women, mostly over 60, some widowed, some divorced, some never married at all. I brought peach cobbler. Still remembered Gregory's favorite way to eat it. Warm, with a scoop of vanilla. No one asked me about my family. No one pried. They just pulled out folding chairs, passed around paperbacks, and poured cheap wine into jelly jars. We laughed. We argued over plot points. We shared recipes and opinions, and in the middle of all that, I forgot to miss the version of my life I used to think I needed. A woman named June, who used to be a high school janitor, looked at me during a discussion on a novel about second chances and said, "You know, Ruth, you've got something steady about you, like a lighthouse." I swallowed hard. That word again. Lighthouse. The postcard I had kept for years flashed through my mind. "I think you've weathered some storms," she added, "but you're still standing." And I realized she was right. I wasn't just surviving. I was steadying. One morning, I opened a folder on my laptop titled Later and started a new document. Title: The Cookbook for Women Who Forgot to Eat Alone. I began jotting down recipes, not just for food, but for moments. Things like lemon roasted dignity, ingredients, one quiet decision, a splash of boundary, and a dash of forgiveness for yourself. Best served warm, to yourself first. I didn't know if I'd publish it. I didn't know if it even mattered. But it made me feel like my hands had purpose again, like my stories told through pies and soups and stories whispered across tables might belong to someone else one day. And that was enough for now. I didn't check my phone much anymore. I had stopped waiting for messages that never came. But sometimes, when I walked past the tide line and watched couples collect seashells or children build lopsided sandcastles, I thought of Gregory, not in pain, just reflection. I wondered if he'd ever sit with the silence long enough to hear his own heartbeat, if he'd ever realize that sometimes the most generous thing a mother can do is step away and let her child learn the shape of absence. Back at the cafe one evening, Marion poured me a second glass of wine and said, "You've changed since the first day you walked in here. You were like someone who'd been living in grayscale. Now you've got some color to you." I smiled, not because I disagreed, but because I hadn't noticed it myself until she said it. "You ever think about staying here for good?" she asked. I looked out the window at the shoreline, where the horizon blurred gently with the sky. "I already have," I said. It was mid-October when the package arrived. No return address, no signature, just my name, written in Gregory's familiar handwriting, tight and slanted like it always had been. I held the box for a while before opening it. It wasn't heavy. I wondered if it was a birthday gift sent late, or a belated apology wrapped in guilt, or maybe just one more attempt to pull me back into a role I no longer played. I opened it slowly. Inside was a framed photo, one I hadn't seen in decades. Me and Gregory, taken the day he graduated medical school. I was standing beside him, still wearing my nurse's badge, beaming like my heart was too full to hold in. His arm was slung around my shoulder, and his eyes looked straight at the camera like he was proud to belong to me. Tucked behind the frame was a note. "Mom, I found this while going through some old boxes at the clinic. I forgot how much I love this picture. You look happy here. I know I've been distant. I've said things I can't take back. I don't expect anything from you. I just wanted you to have this. Gregory." There was no, "I'm sorry." No, "I miss you." No, "Can we talk?" Just a photo, a memory, a flicker of recognition from a man who had once told me I was old and useless. I placed the frame on the counter and stared at it for a long time. Not because it moved me to tears, but because it didn't. That version of me, the one who smiled so hard her cheeks hurt, the one who believed that standing in the background was a kind of honor. She was gone now, and I loved her. But I wouldn't go back to being her again. The photo was a relic, a fossil from a life I'd stepped out of. Still, I didn't throw it away. Instead, I placed it in a small drawer beside my stove, underneath the recipe cards and measuring spoons, a quiet resting place. Not for the sake of nostalgia, but for acknowledgement. Sometimes, the people who hurt us don't realize what they've done until long after the damage is irreversible. And sometimes, they never do. But occasionally, they send a sign, not because they want to fix anything, but because they've begun to see it. And for someone like me, who had once begged silently to be seen, that meant something. The next week, I received an email from one of Gregory's former nurses. She'd tracked me down through the foundation. "Hi, Mrs. Elowin. I hope this isn't intrusive. I just wanted you to know that Gregory's been quieter lately, a little softer. We don't talk much, but he mentioned your name the other day, said you were living near the coast now, said you'd found peace. Whatever's happening, I hope it's healing for both of you, in your own ways." I didn't respond, but I did reread the message twice. Later that night, I sat on my porch with a mug of mint tea. The sea was calm, the breeze light. I thought about how far I'd come, not in miles, but in self-worth. I thought about all the years I gave and how none of it had been wasted, even if it hadn't been appreciated the way I once hoped. Because giving, when it comes from love, leaves traces behind, even if it's invisible. even if the person who received it never says thank you. And sometimes, that invisible trail is what leads them back to a version of themselves they lost. I didn't want a reunion. I didn't want a dramatic apology. I didn't want Gregory to show up on my doorstep. I just wanted to know that somewhere, in his quiet thoughts, he remembered who I was, not just as his mother, but as a woman, a human being who had loved him more than anything, and finally learned to love herself too. I used to speak softly, not because I was timid, but because I'd learned that my words often landed in rooms already too full of someone else's opinions. For years, I'd measured my sentences like teaspoons of sugar, just enough to sweeten, never enough to overwhelm. But these days, when I spoke, I didn't worry if it was too much. I just told the truth. It started with Marion's Thursday night book club. We just finished reading a memoir by a woman who'd left her whole life behind to travel across the country in an old RV. A few women joked about it. Who has time to run away at 65? But I didn't laugh. Sometimes, I said quietly, the best thing you can do isn't to run away. It's to finally stand still, somewhere no one can shake you. They all turned to me, even Marion. I hadn't meant to say it like that, but once it came out, I couldn't take it back, and I didn't want to. June leaned forward. That's how you feel now? I nodded. I didn't come here looking for freedom. I came here because I realized I was already free. I just needed to stop pretending I wasn't. It was the first time I'd said it out loud. The first time I'd claimed my story, not as a widow or a mother or someone's retired nurse, but as Ruth Elowin, a woman who had been buried under decades of obligation and had clawed her way back to light. The room was silent for a moment. Then Marion raised her glass. To Ruth, she said, to all of us finally realizing we don't have to explain our worth to anyone. We clinked our glasses, and I felt something shift. It wasn't approval. It wasn't praise. It was resonance. They understood, because they, too, had waited years to speak without being interrupted. The next day, I walked the shoreline alone and let the breeze play with the edges of my cardigan. I watched a group of young women taking selfies by the water, laughing so hard they nearly fell over. I smiled, not because I missed being young, but because I didn't envy them anymore. There's a strange kind of power that comes with being invisible to the world. Once you stop needing to be seen, to feel real. At a nearby bench, I sat with my notebook. I'd begun turning those recipes into a real collection now, pairing them with essays and memories. I titled one chapter, Things I Cooked While Being Ignored. In it, I wrote, chicken soup for Gregory when he had the flu and never said thank you. Brownies for the PTA bake sale. He never remembered I volunteered for. Roast turkey for birthdays where he barely looked up from his phone. I cooked out of love. Not to be noticed. But now, I cook for someone who listens when I speak. That person is me. I'd like to ask you something. If you're still with me this far, have you ever realized, too late, that you were the only one clapping for yourself all those years? Because if you have, then maybe, just maybe, you know what it means to finally start applauding with both hands. That evening, Marion offered me a small corner shelf in the cafe. For your cookbook, she said, you've got wisdom people need to read. It doesn't matter if it's finished or perfect. What matters is that it's yours. I cried, just a little, not because I was sad, but because someone had made room for my story without me having to beg for it. Back at the cottage, I made a cup of lavender tea and stood on the porch, watching the sun fold itself into the sea. The wind carried no voices, no demands, just the rustling of seagrass and the sound of a woman who had finally found her voice without raising it. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I needed to be anyone's mother or sacrifice or footnote. I was Ruth Elowin. I was a story worth telling, and I had only just begun. There was no dramatic moment when I knew I'd built a new life. No confetti, no applause, just a slow, steady shift, like the tide pulling back after a storm. I was walking home from the market one afternoon, a basket of lemons and rosemary in one arm, when I passed a mirror in the window of a boutique. For a moment, I didn't recognize the woman in the reflection. She was standing taller, shoulders back, face soft, but no longer tired. She looked like someone who had survived something and come out whole. Back at the cottage, I placed the lemons in a blue ceramic bowl and turned on the radio. A Louis Armstrong tune floated through the kitchen. I hummed along as I seasoned a roast and let the garlic sizzle in the pan. It wasn't a special occasion. No one was coming. I was cooking just for me, and that was enough. I'd been journaling more lately, not just memories, but ideas, small business names, titles for a podcast I might never start, questions I'd ask women over 70 if I ever hosted a radio show. One of them was, what does it feel like to stop waiting to be needed? That's where I was now. Not bitter, not lost, just done waiting to be called, to be forgiven, to be useful to people who only saw me through the lens of what I could give them. I was finally living in a world of my own making. There was something strange, peaceful, even about being unreachable. I'd stopped giving out my new number, only sharing it with people who'd earned their way into my present. That list was short, but solid. Marion was on it, so was June, and a girl named Ellie who worked part-time at the library and reminded me what hunger for knowledge looked like. I'd recently offered to mentor Ellie on writing personal essays. She was only 23, raised by her grandmother, and told me one day over coffee, "You make me think growing older might actually be a power, not a punishment." That stayed with me, not because I needed validation, but because I realized I had something to offer that no one could take from me anymore. My wisdom, unbent by shame. A letter came from the foundation that same week. The Ruth Elowin Nursing Fund had received a handwritten note from the second scholarship recipient. Dear Ms. Elowin, I don't know you, but I hope I can be like you someday, strong enough to lift others while standing alone. I want you to know I'll carry your name with pride in every patient's room I walk into. I pressed the page to my chest. It was the kind of thank you I'd waited half a lifetime to hear, from someone I didn't raise, but somehow reached anyway. That Sunday, I visited a little church near the edge of town, not because I was religious, but because I'd seen the door open and heard the music drifting out. I sat in the back pew, alone, while a small choir sang something old and sweet. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like a woman running from pain. I felt like a woman who had arrived when I left. I walked down the hill toward the beach. The sun was setting in layers of amber and rose. I found a bench that faced the water and sat there for a while, my hands folded in my lap, not holding anything, not needing to. I remembered something Gregory once said when he was 15 and full of opinions. You love quiet like it's a person. He told me once, when I refused to turn on the TV after dinner. At the time, I'd laughed and said nothing. But now, I whispered back, it's because quiet never asks me to explain myself. This was my life now. Not revenge, not reconciliation, but peace. And in that peace, I'd planted new roots, not in someone's expectations, not in someone's version of who I was supposed to be, but in the soil of who I had always been. Underneath everything else, a mother. Yes, a nurse. Yes, but also a woman, a writer, a teacher, a quiet store, a lighthouse, standing, not for anyone else to find their way, but to remind myself I had survived the sea. The call came just before dusk. On a Wednesday, I might have otherwise forgotten. This time, I recognized the number. I didn't feel a rush of dread. My hands didn't shake. I just stared at the screen for a moment, set down my pen, and answered, "Hi, Mom." His voice was cautious, like someone walking across thin ice. "Gregory," he cleared his throat. I heard about the scholarship. One of the nurses at the clinic told me she saw your name on the wall." A pause. "That was generous," he added. "You always were, I guess." There it was, that clumsy compliment tied to memory, offered like a peace branch, still wrapped in pride. "I didn't do it to be generous," I said calmly. "I did it because I wanted to give to someone who might actually see me." He didn't respond. I didn't rush to fill the silence. Eventually, he asked, "Are you doing okay?" "I'm doing well," I replied. "Better than I've been in years." A breath, then, almost sheepishly, "I can tell. You sound Different. I am. He told me about the clinic, how they'd scaled back, how the second location never opened, how Rachel had taken a job in another city. He didn't say whether they were still together. I didn't ask. I've been thinking about you, he admitted. I let the words sit. I miss you. There it was. Soft, but real. I'm not the same anymore, I said. The version of me you knew. She's not coming back. I know. He sounded tired. Not from work. Not from stress. Just from pretending for too long. You were right, Mom, he said. About everything. I treated you like a burden. I acted like your years of sacrifice were expected. Like I was entitled to them. I felt the sting in my chest, not because I was hurt anymore, but because I had waited so long to hear those words that they no longer had the weight they once might have. Still, I said, thank you. Would it be all right if I visited sometime? And here it was, the moment in so many stories where the mother opens the door, forgives everything, and invites the lost son back in. But this isn't that kind of story. I think that's something we'll both need to think about, I replied. Separately, he didn't argue. He just said, okay, I understand, and I believed he finally did. After we hung up, I stepped out onto the porch. The sky was lavender and soft, the sea flat as glass. I thought of how many nights I used to sit alone and hope the phone would ring. How many birthdays I spent wishing he would remember, not with a gift, but with warmth. And now that the call had come, I realized something. I didn't need it anymore. I had already made peace with the silence. What I'd built in its place was not contingent on his apology or his return. It stood on its own foundation. Steady, deliberate. Mine, that weekend. Marian hosted a small event at the cafe. A local radio host had heard about my cookbook in progress and wanted to feature me on a segment about women redefining their later years. People need to hear from you, Marian said. You've lived something true. So I sat behind the mic with my hands steady and my voice sure. They asked me what advice I'd give to women who feel invisible. And I said, don't wait for someone to see you. Stand so tall in your truth that your presence speaks before your name does. When I got home that evening, I lit a candle and sat by the window with my tea. I wrote in my journal, not as a mother or widow or nurse, but as Ruth Elowin, a woman who had been pushed aside and who had quietly stepped into the center of her own life. I didn't need a stage. I didn't need applause. I didn't even need closure. All I needed was this. The stillness of a life lived honestly. That was my quiet triumph. Spring arrived gently on the coast, not with fireworks, not with fanfare, but with small things. Saltier air, brighter mornings, and daffodils nudging up through the damp soil near my porch steps. I planted herbs again. Basil. Thyme. I named each pot after a woman I'd met in the last year who reminded me what strength looked like when it wasn't loud. Women like June, Marian, Ellie, and, quietly, myself. One morning, as I stirred honey into my tea, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the glass door. Older, yes, but whole. There was no makeup on my face, no ring on my finger, no one calling from the next room, but I looked content. This life, small as it might seem to some, had become a sanctuary. I had let go of the versions of me that only existed to serve others. What remained was a woman at peace with the silence, no longer haunted by who hadn't clapped, who hadn't stayed, or who never said thank you. Gregory never called again, not out of anger, but understanding. We had said what needed to be said, and sometimes healing doesn't look like reunion. It looks like distance honored with grace. I didn't hate him. I just didn't orbit around him anymore. The cookbook was finally finished. I called it Seasoned. Recipes for women who've been left out, left behind, and left alone. Marian cried when she saw the dedication page. For the women who gave everything and finally gave something to themselves. It wasn't a bestseller. It didn't go viral, but it sold out its first small printing. And I received letters, real ones, from women across the country. Some were nurses, some retired teachers, some just tired. They all said the same thing. Thank you for reminding me I'm not invisible. That was all I needed. One Thursday evening, Marion wheeled out a cake with lavender frosting and candles in the shape of a 78. I laughed. "You're off by a year." She winked. "You get a do-over. This is your real birthday." And in that moment, surrounded by women with silver in their hair and stories in their hands, I blew out those candles not for a wish, but for a quiet declaration. I had arrived, not at someone else's table, not in someone else's house, but in a life entirely my own. Later that night, I walked to the beach barefoot, the way I had the first morning I got here. The waves whispered low against the sand. I stood still, letting the wind move through my hair, and thought of all the chapters behind me, the heartbreak, the silence, the erasure. I didn't need to erase them. They made this chapter possible, because pain didn't destroy me. It refined me. I was not a woman seeking revenge. I was a woman who had reclaimed the pen, and I'd written an ending no one else got to edit. If you've made it here, to the end of Ruth's journey, let me ask you, have you ever realized your greatest victory wasn't proving someone wrong, but remembering who you were before they made you forget? If this story stirred something quiet but strong in you, then maybe you, too, are writing a silent triumph of your own. And you deserve to